Hello, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to the Better is Possible series brought to you by Steelcase's Better Futures community. I think some people are still arriving, but we're going to start now that it is on the hour. We're excited to have you join us today as we explore bold new approaches to address equity, education, and the environment. My name is Kim Kuman. I'm the Director of Social Innovation here at Steelcase. I have the pleasure of hosting our session today on creativity, change, and the courageous imagination. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to share a little about what brings us all together. The Steelcase Better Futures community is designed to help communities thrive through collective action. It's created to explore, invest, and accelerate bold new ideas and practices in collaboration with organizations around the world. Our work is rooted in partnership, and we're committed to fostering a growing global network of changemakers who work together to learn, share, and make a difference where they live. Our areas of impact include ensuring quality education, reducing inequalities, and inspiring climate action. And this brings us to our session today with Cindy Myers-Foley, Director and CEO of the Grand Rapids Art Museum. The Grand Rapids Art Museum believes that art is essential for everyone and that it gives us a greater understanding of different perspectives and experiences and expresses universal themes that help us see each other as one human community. Steelcase has a long history of partnering with the Gram, and we are beyond excited to be joined by Cindy as she demonstrates how intentionality around our personal and professional creativity can not only lead to a more dynamic and fulfilling life, but also a more beautiful, just, and equitable world. Cindy is the director and CEO of the Gram and brings 30 years of experience in creating welcoming museum spaces that encourage curiosity and social engagement. Cindy has served on the faculty for Maine College of Art and Harvard's Project Zero Classroom Summer Institute. She's presented at many museum, art, and education conferences and has spoken twice on the TEDx stage, both of which I recommend you check out. After Cindy's presentation, we'll open the floor for a Q&A session. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A box throughout her presentation, and we'll have time afterwards to go through them together. And with that, I'd like to welcome Cindy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get rolling. All right. So, hi, everyone. I am excited to talk to you about creativity, change, and the courageous imagination. And it starts for me because I think art museums are an incredible case study for the change that we may be seeing over the next couple of decades in a lot of different institutions, in particular in education. Art museums have been rapidly evolving as we try to determine, do we still have relevancy in the way that we did 10 or 20 years ago? And the institution that I oversee and work with is the Grand Rapids Art Museum. And one of the things I want to just point out is that in our evolution, we have been focusing and being incredibly intentional about creativity. So how does that show up? Well, it shows up in a couple of different ways. One, it's the inclusion of it in our mission. So our mission is connecting people through art, creativity, and design. And I want you to just think about that mission for a second. First off, people comes before anything else. But by including creativity, we're acknowledging that art and design actually are the manifestation of big ideas, new ideas, and that is part of our purpose as an institution. The second way it's shown up is we've actually dedicated space. We've opened a new creative learning center, but that space is more than just square footage. It is a shift in our intentionality and our philosophy around what we teach and what we learn in an art museum. I think it's really the third part of this is understanding that as an institution, we had to define creativity. We had to think about what does creativity mean to us. And I've put it at the bottom here, our definition. Creativity is the process of using the imagination, so the ability to conceive of what is not, and critical thinking, so that ability to synthesize, analyze, push at, pull at. So process of using imagination and critical thinking to generate new ideas that have value. What you'll see in that definition is that we really value the development of new ideas. You don't see the word art. We know that artists are fabulous for doing this, but it's really about the importance of developing new ideas that have value. So what does that look like at Graham? How are we leaning into this intentionality to be agents of creativity? I want to show you some play experiments we're engaging in. By play, what I mean is the creative process, when it's activated, is actually just play. Play is creativity in action. So we created some opportunities throughout the museum to engage in, for example, here, imagination. We wanted you to imagine something that hadn't been created before and create your own collage of sorts with paper. Very simple prompts, but engaging the type of thinking we're interested in. Or here, critical thinking, where we've invited our guests to find animals throughout the galleries and then vote on the one that is most like your personality traits. And what happens with this is, in critical thinking, we analyze, we synthesize, we question, we challenge each other. We start to think about, well, what is my personality type and how does that show up? So we're doing things throughout the museum that is intentionally evoking this notion of creative thinking. But you're probably wondering, but why are you doing this? What is the purpose? Well, I'm gonna tell you that this is critically important, not only to us, but I think it should be to all of you as well. And here's a little case making. Uh, in about 2010, a research study came out indicating that American creativity was on a serious decline. What they determined is that two tests that are given across the globe every year, the Torrance test for creativity and the IQ, or the IQ test, what they've shown is in the US, those two tests every year, Americans specifically, test about 10 points higher each decade. So we were getting better since about the 1950s, 60s at creativity, but our IQ was also growing. And this created quite an energy, and communities across the globe were starting to pay attention. Why is the US so dynamic in this space? And so we had folks from Finland and Singapore coming to the US to study our education systems. Why were we getting more creative? That is until the 1990s. And I want each of you to think about where you might have been during the 1990s, because the 1990s, we started to see IQ continued to incrementally increase, but creativity in the US began to plummet. And the research started to show a lot of factors for that. One, I think we found a society that was far more fearful, and kids weren't encouraged to do free play, outdoor free play. We also started to see the media, especially media that didn't engage thinking. And finally, it's the introduction of standardized tests. So read this article. You can still find it if you're curious about the decline in creativity in the US. This is a study, though, for me that almost breaks my heart more than anything else. This is NASA. NASA realized as they were hiring employees, they wanted to gauge how creative they were. And what they found is about 2% of the folks that they gave this test to, whether they were applying for a job or working with NASA in some way, they were creative geniuses. At some point, though, NASA decided they were going to give these to kids, and they made some slight adjustments, but what they found was astonishing. And those of you who are listening, if you have a 5-year-old, this won't be surprising. What they found are 98% of 5-year-olds are creative geniuses. What they found next, though, is what's so astonishing. And that's that by age 10, creativity, the creative genius had dropped 30 to 30%. So I want you to think about what happens between ages 5 and 10. We go to school. So what they started to realize is that creativity is something we are all born with. And then we slowly lose it. And actually, the process of going to school is what actually diminishes our creativity. By the age of 15, 12% are creative geniuses. Another research factor I like to look at is the future of job reports. This is created by the World Economic Forum. And it's done every 5 years, predicting what we need in the workforce in the next 5 years. So when I started really doing this research is back in 2010, and I was looking at the 2015 report, and we were excited because creativity had finally made the list of the skills most needed for the future. And we were pretty pumped about that, and especially people were talking about creativity, making the list. But it wasn't until the next report, the 2015 report that predicted 2020's needs, that we were all a little shocked. Not only did creativity stay on the list, it made the biggest jump of any skill set ever. It had moved from 10 to 3. So at this point, we assumed the next report, we would see creativity hitting maybe number 1. But again, we were surprised. And what happened in the next Future of Jobs report? They took creativity and broke it down into all of its elements. It's now 7 of the 10 elements on this list are in some way, shape, or form conditions or behaviors of creativity. So it is what we need for the future. The type of thinkers we need for the future are creative thinkers. So I personally think this is some spectacular evidence for why the museum should be focusing intentional about creativity, but why education should, why our workplaces should. But you would think, me sharing this, we would overnight, folks would start changing, but it didn't necessarily. And that's why I want to share with you the following. The following is there's a lot of mythology attached to creativity. And I would love for you all to think about what are some of those myths that we hear about creativity. Many are probably popping into your head right now, but I did a quick Google search and found what is the number 1 myth. And thanks to the internet, I was confirmed that that myth is that creativity comes from creative types. So Fast Company had this information, and what happens when you Google creative types? That. And yes, what you're looking at are images when you type in Google Types, these folks pop up. The fact that they're all white men, that's a different discussion for a different time, but it does give you an interesting perspective on the zeitgeist. Who is it that we think are creative types? Steve Jobs, of course, and then the artists, the David Bowies, the Picassos. That's what we mean when we talk about creativity. So this notion that somehow you're born a creative type and you're typically just a white man is part of our zeitgeist in our society. But what do actually creative people have to say about this? People that we know value and talk about their own creativity, they actually know better. So you all probably know this quote, every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. Picasso knew this better than anyone. He knew that the key to him being who he was is that he had held on to that creativity. My favorite though is Maya Angelou. She knew that like a good workout, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. So it's like a good workout that you need to continually work the body, work the brain in order to be a creative type. So the other mythology that drives me absolutely crazy is that somehow your ability to have a skill at art equals creativity. So what do I mean by this? Actually, I want you all to know that art skill has absolutely nothing to do with creativity. And I learned this because I used to hear it all the time. Cindy, I love the work you're doing around creativity, but I'm not creative. I can't even draw a stick figure. No, I heard this constantly. There was this idea that if you could draw well, you therefore were creative. But remember that definition we talked about. Creativity is the ability to have ideas and do something with them. So if you take nothing away from this talk, what I want you to really seriously reconsider is how you've been framing creativity and whether you believe this. Because creativity is the ability to put ideas out into the world. Drawing is a means to put those ideas out. So is painting, so is sculpting, so is cooking, so is gardening, so is writing, so are PowerPoints. They're all mechanisms to get ideas into the world. You may be better at one than another, but we all have to develop skills to do that. But it's about developing the ideas first. If you don't believe me, take it from George Brock. Painting is a nail to which I fasten my ideas. He knows better. He knows it's just the mechanism for his ideas to get into the world. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this intentionality. How do we all become far more intentional about creativity in our lives and our workplaces? I'm going to start by saying at the institution, the Columbus Museum of Art, where I worked before the Grand Rapids Art Museum, I did a lot of thinking about creative dispositions, especially of artists. Artists have a number of dispositions that I think they practice more readily than maybe other fields. And so we generated a list there of about 9 of these. And that's how I started to break down creativity. Creativity is a big idea, but it breaks down into small chunks. So I want to talk to you about a couple of those chunks. First, curiosity. So as you know, or maybe you're starting to gather, I like research. I like grounding kind of my work in research. And Susan Engel is an incredible educator, researcher, and she had gotten a study to really look at how does curiosity show up in classrooms, and especially kindergarten and 5th grade. She'd gotten this well-funded. It was in a school district that had the ability to have her in the classrooms. And the reason she wanted to do this work is research has shown over and over again that kids learn best when they are seeking the answers to their own questions. So think about that. Most of school is seeking the answers to the questions that educators give you. But she realized it's the other way around. When they're seeking the answers to their own questions, they learn best. But the study had to be canceled. And this was heartbreaking. This is what she said. It turned out to be impossible because there was such an astonishingly low rate of curiosity in any of the classrooms we visited. Think about that. Kids didn't have questions. They weren't curious. This is the world in which we are slowly slipping. I want you to think about curiosity because it isn't just an event. I love Warren Berger. He wrote a book called A More Beautiful Question. And he was the one that helped me think about curiosity as part of a cycle. It's wonder, which is a state of being, curiosity, which is a condition, and questioning, which is actually an action. So let me work this through for you. Wonder is suspended disbelief. It's when we experience something we can't quite fundamentally understand or unravel. So toddlers are probably the best humans in the world for experiencing wonder. Here's my daughter, probably around age of 2. And in this moment, my husband captured her seeing her shadow and immediately trying to jump away from her shadow. She'd experienced wonder, suspended disbelief. She didn't know what she was experiencing, but immediately she went through this cycle of, what is it? And curiosity, how do I manage it? Questioning, can I get away from it? Wonder is a critical part of our lives because it gives us a pathway to new understandings, new experiences. I love working in art museums because they're wonder factories. There's actually something called the wonder phase. Now, some of these girls have moved on to excitement, but the wonder phase is when we are so open to new ideas and new understandings, we're just trying to take in as much information as possible. So you can see the mouth is wide open. The eyes get bigger, almost to take in as much detail as we possibly can. And as we begin to process and curiosity and questioning kicks in, you can see that's where it moves to joy and excitement. But wonder is incredibly important because it's like the gates open up. I want to show you this quick video of how wonder shows up in the most unusual places. Yeah, I'm a soccer mom. I've spent many days, Saturdays mostly, on a soccer field. But one of the things you can notice when you have children, if you slow down, is they're constantly engaging in wonder. And parents being annoyed with how wonder can sideline our day, will often just say, come on, let's go. Come, stop messing around, right? But here was a moment where my son had a wonder experience, something he couldn't quite understand, comprehend, but immediately that wonder cycle begins to work and he starts poking at this bubble of water that's captured under the grass, right? Wonder, curiosity, and questioning. It happens, I think, most often in nature, which is why there's so much research around getting kids back into nature, but it also can happen extraordinarily well in museum settings. Wonder, curiosity, questioning. Those of you with young kids, this is another statistic that will not surprise you. The average child asks 125 probing questions a day, 125. But the average adult, a mere 6. So again, we slowly unlearn things like curiosity. Here's an image of my daughter just to demonstrate that. It was when the cicadas were out years ago, and her wonder turned to curiosity, turned to questions. Can a cicada and a grasshopper be friends? The answer was no, by the way, and there were limbs, it was not good, but that ability to wonder, curiosity, and questioning. There's an incredible author, Edith Cobb, who has been thinking probably about wonder and curiosity almost more than any other educator I know. And her name is Edith Cobb. Her book is The Ecology of Imagination in Childhood. And I am going to read this quote because I think it's really important. The sense of wonder is spontaneous. It's a prerogative of childhood. But when it is maintained as an attitude or a point of view in later life, wonder permits a response of the nervous system to the universe that incites the mind to organize novelty of pattern and form out of incoming information. The ability of the adult to look upon the world with wonder is thus a technique and an essential instrument in the work of the poet, the artist, or the creative thinker. Think about that. It actually has to be something that we're intentional about, is seeking wonder. So how do I notice others seeking wonder? Well, one of my favorite things to do, and I'm going to encourage you all to do this today, is go add some artists to your Instagram feed. What I've noticed is that artists will often share moments of wonder, moments that surprise them, and they share it back out with the world. So here you've got a couple Instagram shots that I've captured. Sean Foley coming out of the Lowe's hardware store and seeing the lines on the parking lot, reminding him of Stranger Things. Or Justin Ritchell coming out of his home, realizing he could take a photo of the sun every morning at the same time every day, how it appears different, how it manifests so differently. Or Michael Bongiorno looking at, he's an architect, looking at a space so differently, seeing it with the shadows. Artists also have a wry and wonderful sense of humor. Here's Andy Mowbray, Voldemort in his marshmallow, or Mark Dion seeing that thing I think so many children have seen, but adults, we pass it up, which is a swarm of ants on that cheese, right? Wonder is something we have to cultivate. The second body of skills I think artists embody is imaginative skills. And imagination, what do we think about when we think about imagination? Well, I think this quote by Albert Einstein is critical. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Now, in education, I'm not sure we actually lean into this, but Einstein knew it, and he knew it quite well, that our ability to conceive of what is not, to imagine the world not as it is, but as it could be, was more important than what we knew, what we could memorize. Think about that. In 1919, his theory of relativity was proven, but he had to imagine something that never existed before. But now I want you to think about that year. The year that the theory of relativity was proven was also the year of a major pandemic in the United States. And it was the Red Summer. The Red Summer is a very difficult time in American history. It was the bloodiest and most violent time against Black bodies in our US history. It was a moment in which our country was at a complete standstill. And yet, 1919 is also the year in which I think one of the most beautiful and amazing art forms emerged, and that is the Harlem Renaissance. If any of you had the opportunity to see the show at the Met, it just closed like 2 days ago. But this extraordinary movement came out of 1919 when profound literary, art, and musical accomplishments were taking the world by storm. But it mostly was a group of individuals who felt that they needed to exist in a form other than what they had seen. So they began to imagine the Black body and challenged the Jim Crow stereotypes. They challenged the social disillusionment they were experiencing, the prejudice, the ostracization. They challenged that by creating images and ideas that proved not what they were seeing in the world, but what they knew about their existence. This quote is so important here. The Harlem Renaissance instilled in African Americans across the country a new spirit of self-determination and pride, a new social consciousness, a new commitment to political activism, all of which would provide the foundation for the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. It actually has been proven this is also what started the queer revolution in our society. The Harlem Renaissance was so much more than just an art movement. It was a movement of radical imagination. So I want you to think about that, because all imagination requires some level of courage. For you to imagine something that has not existed before means you must leave behind your expertise, what you know. And this is very difficult for some, because we're so much more comfortable in a space where we know and understand, we're protected by information. But when you imagine, you have to step out of your lane, you have to be vulnerable. But courageous imagination, which is how I define these movements, art movements, but also movements of people and radical change, right? Courageous imagination is the capacity to visualize our world, not as it is, but as it could be. As it could be. I think we need this so desperately right now in our society, in our world. That's why we're fighting for creativity. Because courageous imagination gives us hope. Okay, sometimes I do this. Okay, back at it. So in conclusion, and I tried to do this as quick as possible, so that we can have time for conversation, I do want each of you to reflect for just a moment. I want you to reflect on creativity in your own life. How do you communicate creativity? Have you fallen victim to some of these stereotypes about creativity, about the ability to draw? Or do you understand it's our ability to have ideas and to do something with them in the world? I want you to consider creativity. How are you a catalyst for creativity? Are you a catalyst for that? Do you make space for it in your workplace, at home, with your own children? How are you an agent catalyzing creativity in the world in which you exist? I want you to consider, where's wonder in your life? Are you taking time to see things that you just can't quite understand or comprehend? If you are, start capturing them on your phone. Start thinking about them. Make them visible to others. Make this a habit that we all care about. Where's wonder in our life? Also, are you a champion? Do you see people who are radically changing the world, who are imagining the world in ways that you hadn't even thought of? And are you championing them? Are we lifting them up? Are we telling the world how we celebrate individuals, especially those who have been in spaces in which they have not been welcome, those who have been ostracized? How are we celebrating those who are bringing about creative and courageous imagination? And finally, I ask you, when's the last time you've been to your art museum? I encourage you to come, because we're thinking about these things and we're here for you. We're here to ensure that you're thinking about your own creativity, but you're also an agent for the ideas that we need in the world that we exist. With that, I will conclude, and we can open it up for some questions and dialogue.
Okay, I'm coming back off of back onto the camera. Thank you so much, Cindy. That was truly inspiring. And somebody put in the chat that this would not be a Cindy Foley talk without some tears. So we appreciate the emotion and the passion that you bring to this conversation and to your work, to our community, and to the world. So thank you so much. I've had a couple of questions come in, so I'm going to read them here for you. The first one says, Cindy, it is so wonderful to have you in our community. Thank you for your knowledge about the critical importance of play. What is your favorite way to play?
That's a fabulous question. I think, for me, play is the creative practice, right? And I have an interesting world in which I exist. I live with a visual artist, and so play in a lot of ways is kind of baked into our home life, and especially if you think about the ways in which artists play, they're constantly engaging in kind of curious play. For me, though, I'm not an artist, so I'm not making art as a living. So the place that play shows up the most in my world is actually at work. And it probably annoys my colleagues a lot, but I love experiments. I absolutely love to take a weird risk and see what happens. And I think modeling that, especially in a role of leadership, is really important. But it's also how I learn. We can't just base some things on assumptions. One of the experiments we wanted to try in our galleries. I had a colleague run and get, those folders at the beginning of the year, they're like those plasticky folders. Well, he'd found a ton of them, Christopher had, for like just cents, because it was the school year had ended. And we decided to cut them up into wild shapes with slits, and and just leave them on a table with a provocation. Can you make a sculpture that somehow connects and balances? And we let our visitors go at it. And our gallery associates have been helping us do some of this research, and they start reporting back. And lo and behold, folks were able to do it, but immediately it was an incredibly hard challenge. So then you have to continually evolve, and we have to change it, and we have to keep trying things. But just to give you an example of how play needs to exist in the work that you're doing in some capacity. So, but I also love playing with materials as well. We have materials right now, thanks to our learning and creativity team on our table in the conference room, and I'm one of the first ones to grab materials and play with them. So, great question.
Amazing. Thank you. Got a couple more coming in too. The next one is, I'm curious about the tension you face as a director, manager, supervisor, so roles that require us to lean into and cultivate expertise, and playing and being creative. What's that tension? How do you hold it? And what rituals have you found to be helpful?
Great. Let me see. I'm going to unpack this because I have a lot of thoughts about expertise. Um, there was some research done years ago, and I'm not going to be able to cite it exactly right now, that looked at individuals who were the most creative. And what I found fascinating by this is artists ranked really high, all types of artists, visual, musicians, they ranked high in creativity. There were other fields that ranked high as well, scientists. But there was one particular type of individual employment that ranked the highest, and it was comedian. Comedians, especially those who do improv and or have to respond to crowds, are out of all the rankings, they ranked the highest. And folks were fascinated with this. I actually, I was so interested in this research, I ended up interviewing Tig Notaro,
Oh,
a comedian, about it. And I think what Tig and others have been able to articulate is you have to be comfortable with vulnerability. That's actually where you're going to have the most success. And by being vulnerable and open to new ideas coming at you all the time, that's where the creativity comes from. You're able to have a lot of incoming information and make sense of it and put it back in some form. But the vulnerability was the key part. And I think that's fascinating, because if you think about experts, people especially who self-describe themselves as an expert, the research also shows that individuals who do consider themselves experts sometimes are very resistant to creative work. And in some ways, because they're protecting the ideas they've generated thus far. And so I think that lays out the challenge any leader has in any institution, right? That you may hire someone before their expertise, but you have to actually, their success is less predicated on their expertise. It's more predicated on their vulnerability, their ability to be open to new ideas, to step into spaces they've never been before, to become an expert on something new, and then continually evolve that. And I think your question was really good, and I'm trying to remember all of it, but I think my role as a leader now is I have to model it. I have to actually model it. And then two, I think you have to start hiring for it. You have to look at individuals who are maybe more generalists than they are specific. And that's something in an art museum people get a little uncomfortable with. Like we want to have our art historians be, very focused on a particular area, and But maybe a generalist can bring us new ways of thinking. Maybe they're better at working with people and understanding we're in a people-centered field. So so sorry, I've maybe gone a little bit too far on that, but I think it's something all of us need to consider.
That's great. And I really appreciate your perspective on that. Thank you for that. Next question. What are some of the ways you engage your visitors who visit the art museum to stay interested, to get that whoa or wow emotion?
Yeah, we believe and there are a handful of art museums that are really, really going this direction. We believe in a participatory art museum experience. And that's a bit unusual. And I think you're starting to see a change in art museums. But that means that often we've been trained that when you come to an art museum, you look at the work of art and you process and you move on and you process and you move on. But if you actually apply educational theory to looking at art, we're not actually retaining and understanding what we're seeing and experiencing unless we add some additional engagements along the edges. So there's a quote by John Dewey. It's probably my favorite quote. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience.
Mhm.
So what you'll see if you come to the Grand Rapids Art Museums are opportunities to reflect, think about the big ideas. We have two spaces in which we really use as laboratories for doing that. One is called the Discovery Gallery, which is very family friendly, but trust me, there was an image I almost showed of a gentleman who comes in on Thursday nights. It's our free night. And I had been in a talk and I saw him in the Discovery Gallery, which is a very play-filled gallery space with a lot of provocations. And there is a activity in there in which you are challenged to build your own calder. But it is not easy. It is not the kind of thing that it's easy to do as an individual. Often it takes a group because of balance and trying to get the right flow and the look of things. And he was in there working on creating a sculpture. And afterwards, I went in and asked him, I was like, hi, I'm Cindy. We got to know each other. And he says, yeah, I love this activity. I love challenging myself to see if I can come up with something that looks incredibly different. And then he admits to me, I should probably tell you, this is the third time I've been here to work on this activity alone. And I thought, we all need to be more like him.
Mm.
And that's so that gives you a sense. This isn't just something that children need to be doing. I would actually argue that children need to see their adults doing it in order for us to demonstrate that we value creative engagement and creative thinking. And the other thing you'll see are often opportunities to put post-it note responses, again, reflecting on that experience, thinking about if you've just seen a map show, allowing you to map out a memory or, think about how do memories and maps connect for you. So those are the types of things you'll see at the Grand Rapids Art Museum. Great question.
That was great. Thank you. Okay, this one is in my work, I diagnose employees' barriers to change. What is your favorite exercise to do with business folks to help employees overcome issues with agility and ambiguity?
Okay, hold on. I'm going to show you. Okay. I have an activity that I accidentally tried one time. It worked fabulously. And so I literally keep these cards on my desk. So take a half sheet of paper, cut it in two, get some of those dots that you get like a yard sale or the colored dots, and just randomly place like 1, 2, or 3 dots on a sheet of paper. And here's the prompt. Is to hand this to someone and say, imagine more than dots. Imagine more than dots. So keep looking until something begins to emerge. And maybe it is Rudolph, and you start to draw Rudolph or you start to see something. Remember, wonder and imagination, the ability to conceive of what is not. So usually these are really rough drawings. I give people 2 minutes to do them. But really what I want them to focus on is, how did an idea emerge? Did you see something, or did you, and then you tried to draw the thing that you saw in your mind? Or did you just start to draw and then actually an idea came to you? Making that clear to people that ideas don't always automatically just pop into our head, that sometimes we need pathways, on-ramps to new ideas, to change. It helps them with the change process. Sadly, what I've learned is that the biggest obstacle to change and creativity is that we have a very low tolerance for ambiguity. And I think this is in part, you heard me talk about this study. Since 1990, we've seen, we're focused more on standardized testing than we are, developing new ideas and being more creative. So what that means is now you get adults who have experienced that, who have a very low tolerance to not knowing. I worked with a group of gifted educators. The first time I ever did this, I gave them each a pile. Well, they were working with me and telling me, Cindy, we give our students open-ended challenges, and they freak out. They can't do it. So the teachers went to lunch, they came back, and when they came back, my colleagues and I gave them a pile of Legos, and the challenge was to create metaphor from these Legos. Whatever metaphor, what kind of form would metaphor take? And unfortunately, what happened is about 4 or 5 of those educators at that moment informed me that they'd forgot to tell me they needed to leave for the day. Another group had to go to the restroom at that exact same time. There was even a group that just refused to participate altogether. What I realized, the reason kids have trouble with ambiguity is because we all do. It is human nature. The hardest thing to do is start a new ambiguous project. Change is that ambiguous start. And so we sometimes need on-ramps. Now, that creative challenge was a little bit too much, but that's why I think it's important to think about, what are the on-ramps that help get us going? And how do we as educators and employers realize that that is just human nature, that intolerance for ambiguity.
That's huge, and like such a learning takeaway. And the sheet of paper you have with the dots reminds me of a game I play with my kids called the squiggle game, where we'll just like draw a squiggle and then pass it, and then the next person has to draw something from that, and it keeps them quiet, and it takes up a lot of time.
It's perfect for restaurant situations, but it's exactly what Maya Angelou talks about. Like, in order to be creative, it's simple practices that actually keep that generating in our brains. So you're doing good, Kim.
Thanks. Thanks. Another question comes down to us about kind of the research. Is there research that shows specific ways to keep creativity from diminishing after age 5? I think that graph you showed was pretty eye-opening and depressing.
Yeah. There is so much research, and I think, oh, I didn't include this, so anybody who can Google really quickly and put it in the chat. One of the most important bodies of research that has been done is by a group called Project Zero. Project Zero is out of the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. They were started 55 years ago by Howard Gardner and David Perkins, when the question was asked, what is the value of learning in and through the arts, especially looking at through the lens of creativity. And it was started because there was absolutely no research when they began. So for 55 years, there it is. Yep. So 55 years, they've been saying, what does it mean for us to change classrooms so that we're working towards thinking and understanding rather than memorization? And it's the group, when I started doing this work, I was not an expert, and I still am not, but I wanted to find who knew the most about this and who had seen the most change take place. And so Project Zero, no question. But that said, there's a lot of evidence that really it's about the intentionality of making imagination and curiosity core to your classroom. And then there's
Mm.
lots of ways of doing that. Project-based learning, you can, there are so many mechanisms teachers can employ, but they first have to have a school district and a support, team that says, yes, the imagination and curiosity need to be central to the learning that you're doing. And then they can apply a lot of the tools and strategies to that.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, a couple more here. We've got a little bit of time left. I don't know if you're familiar with the artist's way, but do you have an opinion on it? And especially for folks who might consider themselves as uncreative.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I haven't read it, but my husband has, and so I would say I've probably gotten the short version of it from him over all these times. I think the artist's way is really, it's that on-ramp for many. And when I started doing work around creativity and focusing the work of art museums around creativity, I honestly heard on a daily basis in the beginning, oh, I love that you're focusing on creativity, especially for the children. But I'm not creative. And it drove me batshit crazy. So what I realized is we have to start talking about creativity differently. Our society has allowed this slippery slope to take place. And this is where I think I can't remember his name right now. There have been some authors that have helped that tremendously. And is it The Whole New Mind? But there's a couple of books that really help us get away from creativity has to look a certain way. Creativity is an art form, or creativity is a particular field, but how are we all exercising creativity and what does that look like in the classroom as well? So I think art is a spectacular way to do that, though. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's the best way, personally. But I also worry deeply about the negative associations people attach to an art skill. So it's something I'm trying to communicate at both sides. If you do want to become more creative, yeah, find a way that it's pushing your thinking. But that can manifest in a variety of forms. But typically, it's doing something you've never done before and having the opportunity to make really, really big mistakes with that. So whether it's throwing a pot for the first time and trying to create a skill in which you're, putting a handle on, whatever it is, you will learn how to build that tolerance for ambiguity over time.
Amazing. And before we close out, because we are putting this on behalf of our Better Futures community, I do want to just kind of think about the future and end on that note. And you talked about hope. I'm wondering kind of what makes you hopeful about the future and how does creativity play into that?
Yeah. Um, oh, Kim, I could go into this.
Keynote part two.
Yeah, I know, and I will not cry again, but I do think all of us need hope so desperately right now. One of the areas of research that I'm deeply interested in personally right now is the connection between creativity and civic engagement.
Mhm.
And especially if you look at the young people who are engaging in society to make connections between people, to find bridging opportunities, to bring people with different ideas and different experiences together, that gives me hope. That is what creativity looks like in the world I want to live in, right? And so I think for those of us who have any kind of power, though, how do we lift them up? These typically aren't the folks at the center, they're at the edges. So it is incredibly important, especially for our diverse communities, to find them and use our power for good. Use our power to say, um, this work matters, and the way in which they're giving us hope and connecting communities is critically important. So
Amazing. Thank you so much. One of the things we talk about in our team is the only thing to do with power is to share it. So I love what you're saying there. I want to thank you, Cindy, and thank you all for joining us. We want to be sure to share some additional resources with you in case you're interested in more information. You can find out more about the Grand Rapids Art Museum at artmuseumgr.org. If you're local to Grand Rapids, please visit and support our art museum. If you come to Grand Rapids, please visit and support our art museum. And you can learn more about our Better Futures community in our 2023 impact. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.